Bailey wouldn't stop barking at that basement wall. For weeks, the golden retriever had been acting strange, scratching and whimpering at the same spot. When Samantha saw him racing across the lawn with a dirty baby blanket clenched in his teeth, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. Something wasn't right. As she crouched down to take the blanket from Bailey's mouth, her fingers traced the faded letter M embroidered in the corner. That's when Samantha remembered the news story from 5 years ago about little Mia Cooper, the toddler who vanished without a trace from this very neighborhood. And now, somehow, her blanket had been buried in the Mortons' yard. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you watching this story from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're new here, hit subscribe for more shocking true stories that will keep you up at night. Samantha Dalton never planned to move to Maple Creek Estates. After 8 exhausting years as a child psychologist in downtown Chicago, she had dreamed of a small apartment near the lake, somewhere quiet where she could heal from burnout. Instead, a surprise inheritance from her aunt had landed her in this picture-perfect suburban neighborhood with its manicured lawns and nosy neighbors. "You'll love it here," the realtor had promised as she handed over the keys. "It's so safe. Nothing bad ever happens in Maple Creek." For the first few months, Samantha believed it. Her days fell into a comfortable routine. Early morning jogs, telehealth sessions with her remaining clients, and evening walks where she'd wave to neighbors she was slowly getting to know. The Hendersons across the street, the elderly Patels next door, and the Mortons 2 houses down with their golden retriever Bailey, who always greeted her with enthusiastic barks. James and Ellen Morton were an interesting pair. James worked in finance, always impeccably dressed with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Ellen was quieter, jumping slightly whenever doors closed too loudly. They had moved in just 3 years ago, buying the house from James's cousin who had relocated suddenly to Arizona. "Bailey loves you," Ellen told Samantha one evening when the dog bounded over during her walk. He's usually so shy with strangers. There was something in Ellen's voice, a wistfulness perhaps, that resonated with Samantha. As a psychologist who specialized in trauma, Samantha recognized the signs, the darting eyes, the nervous hands, the carefully chosen words. Ellen Morton was afraid of something, or someone. But Samantha had promised herself she wouldn't bring her work home anymore. The burnout had nearly destroyed her last year. Too many heartbreaking cases. Too many children she couldn't save. Just like she couldn't save Emily. The memory of her little sister's disappearance 20 years ago still haunted her dreams. It was why she had become a child psychologist in the first place, to help the ones who survived, to make meaning from her family's tragedy. So Samantha smiled at Ellen, petted Bailey, and continued her walk. She was just a neighbor now, not a therapist, not a detective. Just someone trying to live a normal life in a quiet suburb where nothing bad ever happened. She couldn't have been more wrong. The Saturday morning that changed everything dawned, bright and clear. Samantha was pulling weeds from her front garden when she heard frantic barking. Looking up, she saw Bailey tearing across the Mortons' lawn, something pink and tattered clutched in his mouth. The dog was running with purpose, his golden fur catching the sunlight as he dodged between flower beds.
"Bailey, come back here!"
Ellen Morton called from her porch, her voice thin with panic. But Bailey wasn't listening. He raced straight toward the hedge, separating the properties, then disappeared beneath the bushes. Samantha heard more frantic digging and barking. "I'm so sorry," Ellen said, hurrying across the street. "He's never like this." James just left for his golf game, and suddenly Bailey went crazy. Samantha stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "It's fine. Let me help you catch him." They found Bailey beneath the tallest hedge, dirt flying as he dug furiously. Something pale pink peeked out from the freshly turned earth. Samantha crouched down, reaching for what she assumed was one of Bailey's toys. Her fingers touched soft, worn fabric. Not a toy, a blanket. A child's blanket. As she pulled it from the dirt, time seemed to slow. The fabric unfurled in her hands, a small baby blanket, once pink but now stained with dirt and age. One corner was carefully embroidered with the letter M and tiny yellow stars. A strange feeling washed over Samantha. She'd seen this blanket before. Not this exact one, but a photo of one just like it. On the news. In the papers. On missing posters that had papered the town 5 years ago. When little Mia Cooper disappeared from her bed in the middle of the night, just 3 houses down from where Samantha now stood. "Where did he get this?" Samantha asked, her voice strange to her own ears. Ellen's face had gone pale. I don't know, it's not ours. We don't have children." Bailey was still barking, scratching at the ground where the blanket had been buried. His paws were caked with mud, his eyes wild with determination. "Has he been digging a lot lately?" Samantha asked, carefully folding the dirty blanket. Ellen's hands twisted together. "He's been acting strange for weeks, especially in the basement. There's this one wall he keeps barking at. James thinks there might be mice." "Or something else," Samantha murmured, looking down at the blanket in her hands. The letter M seemed to burn against her fingertips. That night, Samantha couldn't sleep. The blanket, now washed and drying on her bathroom rack, haunted her. She remembered the Cooper case clearly. Little Mia, not quite 3 years old, had vanished without a trace. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, just an empty crib, and parents destroyed by grief. The police had searched for months. The community had organized volunteer teams, but Mia had never been found. And now her blanket had been buried in the yard of a house 2 doors down from where she'd disappeared. The house that had belonged to James Morton's cousin until he suddenly moved away. Something cold and terrible took root in Samantha's chest. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get involved in other people's trauma anymore. But some promises were made to be broken. Tomorrow, she would start asking questions. But first, she needed to confirm what her heart already knew, that the blanket Bailey had found belonged to a little girl who had vanished into thin air 5 years ago. The library's microfiche machine hummed quietly as Samantha scrolled through archived newspapers. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the dial, scanning headlines from 5 years earlier. Then she found it, a front-page story with a photo of a smiling toddler with wispy blonde hair and big blue eyes. Mia Cooper, age 2, last seen sleeping in her crib. The article mentioned the blanket specifically, pink with an embroidered M and yellow stars, a gift from her grandmother. Samantha sat back, her heart pounding. The blanket in her tote bag was unmistakably Mia's. But how had it ended up buried in the Mortons' yard? Her phone buzzed with a text from Ellen. "Bailey won't stop barking at the basement wall. James is getting annoyed. Do you know any good dog trainers?" Samantha stared at the message. Dogs had incredible instincts, something she'd learned during her therapy work with service animals. If Bailey was fixated on that wall, there might be a reason. "I can come over and take a look," she typed back. "I worked with therapy dogs in my practice." 20 minutes later, Samantha stood in the Mortons' basement, watching Bailey paw frantically at a section of wall between 2 storage shelves. The basement was finished but sparsely furnished, concrete floors, white walls, a few boxes stacked neatly in corners. "He's been doing this for weeks," Ellen explained, her voice tight. "James wanted to get rid of him, but I convinced him to try training first." Samantha knelt beside Bailey, running her hand along the wall where he scratched. Nothing looked unusual, just smooth drywall painted white like the rest of the basement. But something made the hair on her arms stand up. "Was this wall always here?" she asked casually. Ellen hesitated. "I'm not sure. The house was already finished when we bought it from James' cousin Daniel."
Daniel Clark?
Samantha asked, recalling the name from her research. Ellen nodded. He renovated quite a bit before selling to us. James got a family discount. Samantha pressed her ear against the wall. Nothing. But when she tapped it lightly, the sound seemed different from the surrounding walls, hollower somehow. "How well did you know Daniel?" she asked, standing up. "I only met him at the closing," Ellen said. "He was in a hurry to move. Something about a job opportunity in Arizona." Right after Mia disappeared, Samantha thought but didn't say. Instead, she asked, "Would you mind if I brought something over to show you tomorrow? It might help explain Bailey's behavior." That night, Samantha dove deep into online research about the Clark and Cooper families. Daniel Clark had moved into the neighborhood just 6 months before Mia's disappearance. He'd worked nights as a security guard at the local hospital. Quiet, kept to himself. Neighbors barely remembered him. He'd sold the house to his cousin James Morton exactly 3 months after Mia vanished, moving across the country with little notice. The next morning, Samantha stopped by the local police station. Officer Jenkins, a weathered man with kind eyes, remembered the Cooper case all too well. "Broke my heart," he said, pulling the file. "Parents never recovered. Moved away last year. Couldn't bear the memories." "Was Daniel Clark ever investigated?" Samantha asked. Jenkins frowned. "We looked at everyone in the neighborhood. Clark had an alibi working night shift. 16 cameras at that hospital placed him at work all night." "And his house? Was it searched?" "Of course, standard procedure." "Nothing found." Samantha hesitated, then reached into her bag. "Officer Jenkins, yesterday a dog dug this up in what used to be Clark's yard." She placed the now clean blanket on his desk. "I believe it belonged to Mia Cooper." Jenkins stared at the blanket, then at Samantha. "Buried under a hedge. And the dog, he keeps barking at a basement wall. A wall that I think might have been added during renovations around the time Mia disappeared." Jenkins leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Miss Dalton, are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Samantha interrupted. "I'm just telling you what I found." Jenkins sighed. "Look, without a warrant, there's not much I can do. That blanket alone isn't enough for probable cause, especially after 5 years." Samantha left the station feeling frustrated but more determined than ever. If the police wouldn't help, she would have to find more evidence herself. She didn't know exactly what Bailey was trying to show them, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stop until she found out what was behind that wall. The key to gaining regular access to the Morton house turned out to be Bailey himself. Samantha offered to help train him, a suggestion Ellen eagerly accepted behind her husband's back. "James is at his wit's end," Ellen confided during their first session. "He's threatening to take Bailey to the shelter if the barking doesn't stop." For the next 2 weeks, Samantha visited every other day, ostensibly to work with Bailey. The dog was intelligent and well-behaved, except when it came to that basement wall. During their sessions, Samantha carefully mapped the basement, taking mental notes of the layout. The wall Bailey fixated on didn't quite match the rest of the space. It seemed newer, slightly offset from what should have been the foundation line. During one session, while Ellen was upstairs answering a phone call, Samantha quickly took measurements with a pocket tape measure. The basement dimensions didn't match the footprint of the house. There was approximately a 6-foot discrepancy, space that should exist but was seemingly walled off. That night, she drew a rough floor plan, her heart racing. The missing space was just large enough for a small room. The next day, she brought a stud finder under the pretense of needing to secure a training rope. While demonstrating exercises to Ellen, she casually ran the device along several walls, including the suspicious one. Normal walls showed regular studs every 16 inches. The wall Bailey obsessed over showed an irregular pattern, as if it had been hastily constructed. Ellen, Samantha asked carefully while they took a water break upstairs, did Daniel leave any records of the renovations he did? Floor plans, permits, anything like that? Ellen shook her head. Not that I know of. James handled all the paperwork when we bought the place. And James, he's close with his cousin? A shadow crossed Ellen's face. They weren't growing up. Daniel had some problems, but they reconnected when Daniel moved here. After he left, James didn't talk about him much. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. James was home early. His smile tightened when he saw Samantha. "Making progress with the dog?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Some," Samantha replied. "Dogs can sense things we can't sometimes. Has Bailey always been interested in that particular wall?" Something flickered in James's eyes. "It started after we moved in. Probably smells the mice in the walls." He turned to Ellen. "I thought we agreed to keep Bailey out of the basement entirely." "The training," Ellen began, but James cut her off. "I'm sure Miss Dalton has other methods that don't involve the basement, don't you?" There was no mistaking the dismissal. As Samantha gathered her things to leave, she heard Bailey start barking frantically from upstairs where Ellen had taken him. Not just barking, howling, as if in distress. That evening, Samantha decided to look more closely at Daniel Clark. His sudden departure had always seemed suspicious. A quick internet search uncovered little, but a deep dive into property records revealed something interesting. Before purchasing the house in Maple Creek, Daniel had lived in the same town as the Coopers, just 3 blocks from their previous home. They had moved to Maple Creek 8 months before Daniel. It couldn't be coincidence. 2 days later, Ellen called in tears. "James took Bailey to his brother's farm upstate. Says he needs country life to calm down." Samantha felt sick. Without Bailey, she had lost her reason to regularly visit the Morton house. But more importantly, they had lost their strongest ally, the one who had found Mia's blanket, who knew something was wrong with that wall. That night, Samantha was startled by a knock at her door. Ellen stood on her porch, hugging herself against the evening chill, eyes red-rimmed. "He lied," she whispered. "Bailey's not at the farm. I called his brother to check on him, and they knew nothing about it. James got rid of him, and won't tell me where." Samantha pulled Ellen inside. "Ellen, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever heard anything strange from that basement wall? Anything at all?" Ellen's face crumpled. "I thought I was imagining things. About a month ago, when James was on a business trip, I heard scratching, like Bailey, but softer. And once her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought I heard crying, but it was late. And our house makes noises, and James says I have an overactive imagination." "Ellen," Samantha said carefully, "I believe that blanket Bailey found belonged to Mia Cooper, the little girl who disappeared 5 years ago." Ellen's eyes widened. "That's impossible. Daniel, he was working that night." They cleared him. "Yes, he was at work, but what if someone else wasn't?" Understanding dawned on Ellen's face. "No," she whispered. "James wouldn't, he couldn't." "When did you and James start dating?" Samantha asked gently. 5 years ago, Ellen said, her voice hollow. "Right after he moved here to help Daniel sell the house." As Ellen left, visibly shaken by their conversation, Samantha noticed a car parked across the street, a police cruiser. Officer Jenkins sat watching the Morton house, his expression grim. He nodded slightly when he caught Samantha's eye. She wasn't alone in her suspicions anymore. Later that night, Samantha was awakened by frantic scratching at her back door. She opened it to find Bailey, muddy and exhausted, his leash trailing behind him. Somehow he had escaped and found his way to her, the one person who had listened to him. "Good boy," she whispered, hugging him tight. "You brave, brave boy." The next morning, Samantha received a text from Ellen. James left for Chicago. Business trip until tomorrow night. I'll be home all day. It was time to find out what was behind that wall. The neighborhood outdoor barbecue had been Ellen's idea. James insisted before he left, she explained to Samantha that morning, said we needed to be more social. Everyone on the block is coming. It was the perfect opportunity. With neighbors milling around the first floor and backyard, Samantha and Ellen could slip into the basement unnoticed. Bailey, now clean and fed after his mysterious journey back to Samantha, would come too, hidden in a large tote bag until they were downstairs. The party was in full swing by 6 o'clock. Children played tag in the yard while adults clustered around the grill, drinks in hand. Samantha arrived with her tote bag and a plate of cookies, nodding to Officer Jenkins, who stood chatting with the Hendersons, still in uniform but just stopping by. Ellen asked me to grab some extra paper towels from the basement, Samantha announced to no one in particular as she slipped away from the group. Downstairs, Ellen was already waiting, pacing nervously. I don't know about this, Samantha. What if we're wrong? James will never forgive me for snooping. And if we're right? Samantha countered, letting Bailey out of the bag. The dog immediately raced to the wall, barking and scratching with renewed vigor. Ellen hesitated, then nodded. I found these in James's desk. She held up a set of small keys. I think one might fit that panel. She pointed to what looked like an electrical access panel near the floor, partially hidden behind a storage shelf. Samantha moved the shelf while Ellen tried the keys. The third one worked, revealing not an electrical panel but a small safe. Inside was a single item, a baby monitor receiver, switched off. Ellen's hands trembled as she picked it up. Why would he have this? We don't have children. Turn it on, Samantha whispered. Ellen flipped the switch. Static filled the air, then nothing. Bailey continued to bark at the wall, more frantic now. Maybe the batteries in the transmitter are dead, Samantha suggested. Or maybe she didn't finish her sentence. Instead, she pressed her ear against the wall where Bailey was scratching. At first, she heard nothing over the dog's barking. Bailey, she soothed, and the dog quieted, though he continued to paw at the wall. In the silence that followed, Samantha heard it, faint but unmistakable, a shuffling sound, movement. There's someone behind this wall, she whispered, her blood turning to ice. Ellen's face drained of color. Without a word, she went to James's workbench and returned with a hammer. With trembling hands, she struck the wall where Bailey had been scratching. The drywall cracked easily, too easily for a proper supporting wall. A few more blows created a hole the size of a fist. Stale air rushed out, carrying a smell that made Samantha's stomach turn, unwashed body, human waste, fear. Bailey barked excitedly, trying to push his nose through the hole. Samantha gently pulled him back and peered inside. At first, she saw only darkness. Then, as her eyes adjusted, shapes emerged, a small mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and huddled against the far wall, a small figure with matted blonde hair. Not a toddler anymore, a child of 7 or 8, deathly pale, staring back at her with huge, terrified eyes. "Mia?" Samantha whispered. The child didn't respond, just shrank further back against the wall. Upstairs, the back door slammed. Heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. A man's voice called out, "Ellen, where are you?" James was home. Ellen grabbed Samantha's arm. "He's not supposed to be back until tomorrow." Footsteps started down the basement stairs. Bailey growled, positioning himself between the women and the staircase. "Ellen? What are you doing down here?" "The guests are asking for—" James froze on the bottom step, taking in the scene, the hole in the wall, Bailey's protective stance, the hammer in Ellen's hand. For a moment no one moved. Then James's face transformed, rage replacing surprise. "What have you done?" he hissed. "There's a child behind this wall," Samantha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mia Cooper. She's been here for 5 years." James's eyes darted between them, calculating. "You've lost your mind. There's nothing behind that wall but pipes and electrical." "Then you won't mind if we make the hole bigger," Samantha challenged, reaching for the hammer. James lunged forward, but Bailey was faster. The dog leapt at him, teeth bared, catching his arm. James yelled in pain and surprise, stumbling backward up the stairs with Bailey in pursuit. "Go!" Samantha pushed Ellen toward the hole. "Make it bigger. Get her out." Samantha raced up the stairs after James and Bailey. In the kitchen, neighbors had heard the commotion. James was trying to explain away the dog attack when he saw Samantha emerge from the basement. "She's crazy," he shouted, pointing at Samantha. "She broke into my basement with that vicious dog." But Officer Jenkins was already moving forward, hand on his weapon. "Mr. Morton, I need you to step outside with me."
You can't be serious.
James sputtered. "This is my house. She's trespassing." "There's a child in your basement wall," Samantha said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "A little girl who's been missing for 5 years. The room exploded into shocked exclamations. James's face contorted, and for a second Samantha thought he might confess. Instead, he bolted, shoving past startled neighbors toward the front door. He made it 3 steps onto the front lawn before Jenkins tackled him to the ground. Downstairs, Ellen had broken through. As Samantha rushed back down the steps, she saw Ellen crawling through a jagged hole in the wall, emerging with a small skeletal child in her arms. The girl was dressed in filthy clothes, several sizes too small, her blonde hair matted and dirty. She didn't struggle or speak, hanging limply in Ellen's embrace like a broken doll. "Call an ambulance!" Samantha shouted up the stairs, where shocked neighbors now crowded the doorway. As sirens wailed in the distance, Samantha knelt beside the child. Mia Cooper, you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore." The little girl's eyes, enormous in her gaunt face, fixed on Samantha. Her cracked lips parted, but no sound came out. Then her gaze shifted to Bailey, who had returned to the basement and now approached cautiously, tail wagging gently. A tiny hand reached out toward the dog. Bailey moved forward, gently licking her fingers, and then, like ice breaking after a long winter, the child began to cry. The hospital corridor was eerily quiet at 2 a.m. Samantha sat alone in the waiting area, Bailey sleeping at her feet. Ellen had been taken in for questioning hours ago. The Coopers were flying in from their new home in Colorado, and Mia, now confirmed through DNA testing to be Mia Cooper, was in a secure room under police guard, being evaluated by specialists. Dr. Reeves, the pediatric trauma specialist, emerged from Mia's room looking exhausted. She nodded for Samantha to follow her to a private consultation room. "It's a miracle she's alive," Dr. Reeves said once the door closed behind them. "Severe malnourishment, vitamin D deficiency, muscle atrophy. She hasn't stood upright in years, but physically, we can help her recover." "And mentally?" Samantha asked, her throat tight. Dr. Reeves' eyes filled with tears. "That's going to be a much longer journey. She hasn't spoken yet. Based on what we've pieced together, she was kept in that space since she was abducted at age 2. Her only human contact was with her captor. James Morton, Samantha supplied. And possibly Daniel Clark before him," Dr. Reeves added. "The police are still investigating, but they believe Clark abducted her, built the hidden room, and when he needed to leave town, passed her care to his cousin." Samantha felt sick, like she was property, something to be handed down. "The only positive is that she responds to the dog," Dr. Reeves continued. "When we mentioned Bailey might visit, we saw her first emotional reaction, something like hope." Back in the waiting area, Officer Jenkins, now Detective Jenkins, given the high-profile nature of the case, approached with a grim expression. "We've got a problem," he said, keeping his voice low. "The DA is concerned about the evidence, the way it was obtained." "We found a kidnapped child," Samantha hissed. "By breaking into a wall without a warrant," Jenkins countered. "Morton's lawyer is already claiming illegal search, trespassing, and that any evidence from the hidden room is inadmissible." "That's insane." Samantha struggled to keep her voice down. "A child was imprisoned in his house. A house he claims he didn't know had a hidden room." Jenkins sighed. "He's saying Daniel built it without his knowledge, that he never heard anything, that Ellen's mental health issues led her to break the wall based on your conspiracy theories. But the baby monitor, gone. Can't find it anywhere. Must have been removed during the chaos." Samantha sat back, stunned. "So he might get away with this." "I didn't say that," Jenkins replied. "But we need more evidence, something that directly ties James to knowledge of that room and Mia's captivity." The next day brought more challenges. The media had gotten hold of the story, camping outside both the hospital and Samantha's home. Ellen had been released, but was staying with her sister, refusing to speak to anyone, and the Coopers had arrived. Broken people barely holding themselves together at the prospect of reuniting with the daughter they had mourned for 5 years. Samantha threw herself into researching James and Daniel's relationship, looking for anything that might help the case. Tax records, property transfers, phone logs, anything that could prove James knew about Mia. 3 days later, exhausted from her search, Samantha received an unexpected call. "This is Ellen," the quiet voice said. "I need to see you, alone. There's something you should know." They met at a small coffee shop 2 towns over. Ellen looked haggard, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights.
"I found something," she said, sliding a small object across the table.
"A USB drive? It was hidden in James's gun safe. I remembered the combination." "What's on it?" Samantha asked. "Videos," Ellen whispered, "of Mia. In that room. James, he recorded her. For years. Talking to her through a speaker in the wall, telling her he was her father now, that if she ever tried to leave, he would know and he would hurt her." Samantha felt the blood drain from her face. Ellen's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. "There's something else. Something I didn't tell anyone. 2 years ago, I got pregnant. James was so angry, he said he didn't want children. He made me get an abortion, but now I wonder." Her voice broke. "Did he already have the child he wanted? One he could control completely?" With the new evidence, the case against James Morton seemed ironclad, but at the preliminary hearing, his lawyer dropped a bombshell, claiming Ellen had created the videos herself to frame James, motivated by a failing marriage and her own mental instability. "The timestamps on these videos could easily have been manipulated," the lawyer argued. "And conveniently, Mrs. Morton is the only one who knew where to find them. There's no proof my client ever recorded or viewed these files." The judge looked troubled, but had to admit the defense raised valid questions about the evidence chain. The case was hanging by a thread. That evening, Samantha sat on her porch with Bailey, feeling defeated. The dog nudged her hand, whimpering softly. "I know, boy," she whispered. "We can't let him get away with this." Her phone rang. Detective Jenkins. "Mia spoke," he said without preamble. "Just one word. A name." He paused. "Bailey. She's asking for the dog." The meeting with the district attorney was tense. Jenkins had pushed hard for this opportunity, and now everything hinged on what Samantha could offer. "Let me be clear," DA Patricia Hawkins said, her stern face showing no emotion. "We're building a case against James Morton for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. But our evidence has problems. The videos," Samantha began, "could be contested as manipulated. Hawkins cut in. The hidden room itself is strong evidence, but Morton claims ignorance of its existence. We need something that puts him in direct contact with Mia, something incontrovertible. Jenkins leaned forward. That's where Dr. Dalton's proposal comes in. Samantha took a deep breath. Mia asked for Bailey. She connected with him when he found her blanket and when he helped rescue her. I believe if we bring Bailey to visit Mia at the hospital, it might help her open up about what happened to her. And you're qualified to facilitate this interaction? Hawkins asked skeptically. I specialized in trauma therapy for children before I moved here, Samantha explained. I've worked extensively with therapy animals, and more importantly, I'm the connection between Bailey and Mia. She's seen me with him. There's already a foundation of trust. Hawkins considered this, tapping her pen against her legal pad. The defense will claim you coached her. Not if it's properly documented and witnessed, Jenkins countered. We'll have hospital staff present. Record everything, follow all protocols. After a long pause, Hawkins nodded. One session. If it yields nothing, we move on. The hospital room had been transformed for Mia's comfort. Soft lighting, colorful murals on the walls, stuffed animals on the bed. But Mia herself remained withdrawn, curled into a tight ball, responding only minimally to doctors and nurses. As Samantha entered with Bailey on a leash, she saw Mia's head lift slightly, her eyes focusing for the first time since her rescue.
"Hi, Mia,"
Samantha said softly. Someone wanted to see you. This is Bailey. He's the one who found your blanket. Bailey, seeming to understand the delicacy of the situation, approached the bed slowly. His tail wagged gently as he rested his chin on the mattress near Mia's hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then so slowly it was barely perceptible, Mia's fingers uncurled and reached toward the dog's soft fur. He's a good boy, Samantha continued, keeping her voice gentle. He knew you needed help. He never stopped trying to find you. Mia's hand made contact with Bailey's head, stroking tentatively. The room was silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors. Bailey visits me every day, Samantha said. He likes to go for walks and play fetch. Maybe when you're feeling better you could come visit him too. Mia's eyes flicked to Samantha's face, then back to Bailey. Her lips moved, forming that one word again. Bailey. That's right, Samantha encouraged. Bailey. He was very brave, wasn't he? Even when people didn't believe him about the wall, something shifted in Mia's expression. A flicker of understanding, perhaps even agreement. Carefully, Samantha reached into her pocket and removed a small recorder, showing it to Mia. Mia, is it okay if we talk a little bit? I'd like to record our conversation so I don't forget anything important. You can stop anytime you want. Mia didn't respond, but she didn't withdraw either. Samantha took this as permission to continue. Bailey knew someone was behind that wall, Samantha said. Did you know Bailey was there? Could you hear him? A tiny nod. Progress. Could you hear other things too? People talking, maybe? Another nod, slightly more definite. Did you ever hear a man's voice? Someone who talked to you through the wall? Mia's hand stopped moving on Bailey's fur, her body tensed. It's okay, Samantha assured her. He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here. After a long silence, Mia's voice emerged, barely audible. Samantha's heart sank. Had Mia been so young when taken that she now believed her captor was her father? The man who kept you in that room, he told you he was your dad? Mia nodded again. And did you ever see this man? Samantha asked gently. Did he ever come into the room? Night, Mia whispered. Bring food. Watch me. Samantha steadied her breathing, fighting to maintain her professional composure despite the horror of what she was hearing. Mia, if I showed you a picture, could you tell me if it was the same man who came into your room at night? When Mia nodded, Samantha carefully removed a photo array prepared by the police, 6 similar-looking men, with James Morton in position number 4. She laid it on the bed where Mia could see it. Bailey whined softly as Mia stared at the photos. Her small hand trembled as she reached out and touched photo number 4. "Him," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "That's him." Then, in a rush of words that seemed to surprise even her, he told me my real mom and dad didn't want me anymore, that I was his little girl now, that no one was looking for me because they forgot about me. Tears spilled down her hollow cheeks. But Bailey didn't forget. Bailey found me. The recording of Mia's testimony was irrefutable. James Morton was denied bail and awaited trial in county jail. Daniel Clark was arrested in Arizona, where investigators discovered disturbing evidence that Mia hadn't been his first victim. Ellen filed for divorce and cooperated fully with prosecutors, though she would likely face charges of her own for not reporting her suspicions sooner. And the Coopers began the delicate process of reconnecting with the daughter they had never stopped searching for. But for Samantha, one piece remained unresolved. How had Bailey known? What had drawn him so persistently to that wall? What had he sensed that humans had missed? The answer came unexpectedly during a follow-up interview with Ellen. "There's something I didn't tell you before," Ellen admitted. "About Bailey. He wasn't always our dog." Samantha frowned. "What do you mean?" "He belonged to the Coopers," Ellen said quietly. "James told me they couldn't take the dog when they moved away, so Daniel took him in. Then Daniel left him with us when he moved to Arizona." The realization hit Samantha like a physical blow. Bailey was Mia's dog. He belonged to her family. Ellen nodded, tears filling her eyes. He knew she was there all along. For 5 years he knew his little girl was behind that wall, and no one listened to him until you came along. That night, Samantha made a decision. Justice would be served in the courtroom, but healing, that would take a different kind of intervention. With Bailey beside her, she drove to the hospital for an unscheduled visit. The Coopers were there, sitting awkwardly at Mia's bedside, the gulf of 5 lost years stretching between them. Mia was holding her recovered blanket, rubbing the embroidered Mia with her thumb. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Samantha said from the doorway, but someone insisted on saying hello. Bailey trotted into the room, his tail wagging frantically as he recognized Mia. For the first time since her rescue, Mia's face transformed with pure joy. "Bailey," she cried, holding out her arms. The Coopers watched in astonishment as their daughter, who had barely spoken to them, came alive for the dog. "He was yours," Samantha explained gently. "Before you were taken, he was your family's dog." Mrs. Cooper gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible. Our Bailey ran away the night Mia disappeared. We never found him." "He didn't run away," Samantha said softly. "He was taken too by the same people who took Mia." The realization dawned on their faces. Bailey hadn't abandoned Mia, he had been forced away from her, but somehow found his way back to the house where she was hidden. For 5 years, he had tried to tell anyone who would listen that his little girl was there, trapped behind that wall. As Bailey jumped onto the hospital bed, covering Mia's face with joyful licks, the Coopers began to cry. Not the devastated tears of loss they had shed for 5 years, but tears of wonder at the loyalty of the dog who had never forgotten their daughter and who had ultimately led Samantha to bring her home. The courtroom fell silent as Mia Cooper entered, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. After 6 months of intensive therapy, she no longer looked like the skeletal child they had pulled from the wall. Her blonde hair shone, her cheeks had filled out, and she walked with only a slight limp, a remnant of her years confined in too small a space. But her eyes still held the shadows of her ordeal. And today those eyes would have to look at James Morton. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Samantha asked her quietly as they took their seats. She had continued working with Mia as her therapist, helping her prepare for this moment. Mia nodded, her jaw set with determination beyond her 8 years. Bailey is brave. I can be brave too. Bailey himself waited outside with a court officer. As a key witness in the case, Mia had been granted special permission to have her therapy dog present during her testimony, but for now, she had insisted on walking in on her own. "The prosecution calls Mia Cooper to the stand," announced D.A. Hawkins. The journey to the witness box seemed endless. Mia's steps faltered as she passed the defense table where James Morton sat in a tailored suit, his expression carefully arranged to appear concerned rather than calculating. But she didn't stop, and she didn't look away. After being sworn in, a process simplified for her age, Mia sat in the witness chair, her feet dangling above the floor. "Mia, can Bailey join you now?" Hawkins asked gently. At Mia's nod, the therapy dog was brought in, specially vested and trained for courtroom appearances. He settled at her feet, his warm presence visibly calming her. "Mia, do you see the man who kept you in the wall in this courtroom today?" Hawkins asked. Without hesitation, Mia pointed at James Morton. "Let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, James Morton," Hawkins said. What followed was the most difficult part, Mia's testimony about her years of captivity. With remarkable composure, she described being taken from her bed by the first man, Daniel Clark, then later being given to James Morton. "He said I was his special secret," Mia explained, her voice small but steady. "He said if I ever made noise when other people were in the house, he would know, and I would be punished." "How did he punish you, Mia?" Hawkins asked gently. "No food, no light, sometimes no water." Her hand dropped to Bailey's fur, drawing strength. "He watched me all the time on his camera," he said. "He said he could see me even when I was sleeping." In the gallery, Mrs. Cooper stifled a sob. Mr. Cooper's face was rigid with suppressed rage. "Did the defendant, Mr. Morton, ever tell you why he was keeping you in that room?" Hawkins continued. Mia nodded. "He said I was his little girl now, that he would keep me forever. That no one else would ever love me like he did." A murmur ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge. "And how did you survive all those years, Mia?" Hawkins asked, her voice gentle. Mia glanced down at Bailey, then over at Samantha, before answering. "I remembered things. My real mom singing to me. My blanket that got left behind. And Bailey. I heard him sometimes, barking at the wall. It helped me remember who I really was." Morton's attorney declined to cross-examine Mia, aware that questioning an 8-year-old victim would only damage their case further. As Mia returned to her seat, she walked past James Morton again. This time she looked directly at him, not with fear but with a strength that made him look away first. The prosecution's case was devastating. The videos found on James's USB drive. The baby monitor discovered in a neighbor's trash can, where James had disposed of it during the chaos of Mia's rescue. Forensic evidence from the hidden room. Ellen's testimony about James's behavior, his insistence that Bailey be kept away from the basement, his unexplained absences to check on things downstairs. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to shift blame to Daniel Clark, portraying James as an unwitting accomplice who had been manipulated by his cousin. But their arguments fell apart under the weight of evidence and the power of Mia's testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the count of kidnapping in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of false imprisonment of a minor, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. The list went on. James Morton would spend the rest of his life in prison, with no possibility of parole. As the courtroom erupted in relieved exclamations, Samantha watched Mia. The little girl didn't cheer or cry. She simply leaned down to Bailey and whispered something in his ear. The dog licked her cheek once, his tail wagging gently. Later, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the Cooper family. Questions flew from all directions. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Mia shrank back against her father's legs, the noise and crowd overwhelming after years of isolation. Sensing her distress, Bailey moved protectively closer. Samantha stepped in, creating a buffer between Mia and the press. "The Cooper family requests privacy as they continue their healing journey," she announced firmly. "Today justice was served, but the recovery process is ongoing." As they made their way to the waiting car, a reporter called out one final question. Mia, how does it feel to be free?" The little girl paused, looking up at Samantha with those old soul eyes. "I was always free inside my head. That's the one place he couldn't lock up." That evening, the Coopers invited Samantha to their home for a quiet dinner. Their house was different from the one where Mia had been taken, a fresh start in a new neighborhood, though still close enough for Samantha to continue Mia's therapy. After dinner, Mia asked Samantha to come see her room, a space her parents had let her design herself, with sky-blue walls and cloud-painted ceilings. No corners or closed spaces. 3 night lights. "I have something for you," Mia said, pulling a carefully wrapped package from her dresser drawer. Inside was a framed drawing, childish but powerfully rendered. It showed a golden dog standing protectively beside a small girl. Behind them was a house with a wall that had been broken open, light streaming through the gap. "It's for your office," Mia explained. "So other kids know that somebody will hear them even if they're behind walls." Samantha felt tears pricking her eyes as she accepted the gift. "It's beautiful, Mia. Thank you." Bailey, who had followed them upstairs, jumped onto Mia's bed and settled himself on her pillow, his favorite spot in his rightful home. "Dr. Sam?" Mia asked hesitantly, using the nickname she'd created during their therapy sessions. "Do you think I'll ever forget being in the wall?" Samantha considered her answer carefully. "I think those memories will always be part of you, Mia. But they won't always be the biggest part. They'll get smaller as you make new memories, happy ones with your family, and Bailey and all the friends you'll meet." Mia nodded, her expression solemn. "James said I'd always belong to him, that I'd never be normal." "He was wrong," Samantha said firmly. "You never belonged to him, not even when you were in that wall. Your body was trapped, but your mind stayed free. That's why you survived. That's why you're here now." From downstairs, Mrs. Cooper called that it was time for Mia's bath. The little girl hugged Samantha tightly, then raced off with Bailey trotting happily behind her. Samantha stood alone in the bedroom, looking at the drawing in her hands. Through tears, she traced the outline of the dog and the little girl standing in the light of a broken wall. So much darkness, but not enough to extinguish the connection between a child and the dog who never forgot her. Not enough to break a spirit that refused to be owned. As she carefully placed the drawing in her bag to take to her office, Samantha thought about the walls that still existed, the ones in Mia's mind, the ones she would help her break through in the years of therapy ahead. But she had no doubt that Mia would emerge from those walls too, step by step, into the light. Because Mia Cooper had already survived the impossible, and she was free. 1 year to the day after Mia's rescue, Samantha pulled into the driveway of the Cooper family's home. The for sale sign swung gently in the front yard, a final step in their healing journey. They were moving to Colorado, close to Mrs. Cooper's parents, for a complete fresh start. Mia bounded out the front door before Samantha could even turn off her engine. At 9 years old, she looked like a different child from the one they'd found in the wall. Her blonde hair in a neat braid, her cheeks full and rosy, her gait confident, despite the slight limp that doctors said might always remain. "Dr. Sam, we got the house. The one with the big backyard for Bailey. Dad says we can move in next month." Bailey appeared behind her, gray now around his muzzle but still spry, his tail wagging at the sight of Samantha. He had become a certified therapy dog 6 months earlier and would soon begin working with other traumatized children, a role he seemed born for. "That's wonderful news," Samantha said, hugging Mia. They had gradually transitioned from formal therapy sessions to mentorship, and today would be their final meeting before the family's move. Inside, the house was mostly packed, but Mrs. Cooper had set out cookies and lemonade. "We can't thank you enough," she said, squeezing Samantha's hand, "for everything." Mr. Cooper nodded agreement. "Mia asked if you would come with us for one last visit before we leave town," he explained. "It's important to her." Samantha understood immediately. Of course. The drive took 20 minutes. No one spoke as they pulled up to the house where Mia had been held captive. The Morton house, now long empty, its windows dark and yard overgrown since Ellen had moved away after the trial. Mia stared at it from the car window. Bailey pressed against her side. "You don't have to go any closer if you don't want to," Samantha assured her. But Mia shook her head. "I need to say goodbye to it. Dr. Sam says that helps with closure." They walked up to the edge of the property, no further. Mia didn't need or want to go inside. She stood silently, looking at the house where she had lost 5 years of her childhood. "I used to think it was my fault," she said finally. "That I got taken, that I didn't yell loud enough when it was happening." "It was never your fault," her father said fiercely, his arm around her shoulders. Mia nodded. "I know that now, and I'm not scared of this house anymore." She looked up at Samantha. "Because it's just a house. The bad things that happened here don't have power over me unless I let them." From anyone else, these might have sounded like rehearsed therapy phrases, but from Mia, they carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. As they turned to leave, Bailey suddenly stiffened, his ears perking up. He looked toward the house, then back at Mia, a low whine in his throat. "It's okay, Bailey," Mia soothed, kneeling to hug him. "There's nobody left in there. We're all out now. You did it. You saved me." Later, after saying their goodbyes with promises to video call regularly, Samantha sat alone in her car, watching the Cooper family's house fade in her rearview mirror. Her chest ached with the particular bittersweetness that came with successful therapy, joy at a patient's healing, sadness at letting them go. Her phone chimed with a text from Detective Jenkins. Now a close friend after everything they'd been through together. Clark's plea deal finalized, 40 years. No parole. It's over. Daniel Clark had eventually admitted to abducting Mia and 2 other children over the years. The other victims had not survived. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he had provided information that led to the recovery of their remains, giving 2 more families the closure they desperately needed. Samantha texted back a simple thank you, knowing Jenkins would understand all she couldn't put into words. As she drove home, she thought about the case that had changed so many lives. If Bailey hadn't been so persistent, if she hadn't recognized the significance of that blanket, if Ellen hadn't found the courage to question her husband, how different things might have been. How many small decisions and brave moments had aligned to save one child. At home, Samantha unpacked her office, preparing for tomorrow's patients. The frame drawing Mia had given her held pride of place on her wall, the golden dog, the little girl, the broken wall with light streaming through. Beside it hung a new addition, a photograph taken at Bailey's therapy dog certification ceremony. Mia stood proudly beside him, her hand resting on his head, both of them looking directly at the camera with clear, unafraid eyes. Attached to the frame was the red collar Bailey had been wearing when he found Mia's blanket, a reminder that sometimes the most important voices are the ones that don't use words. That loyalty can transcend language, that some bonds cannot be broken, even by walls and years and monstrous cruelty. Samantha touched the collar gently, thinking of all the children who would never be found, and the few precious ones who were. Of Bailey, who had never stopped trying to tell the world his little girl was trapped behind that wall. Of Mia, who had kept her spirit free even when her body was captive. And she thought of the message she would carry forward in her work with other traumatized children, that walls can be broken, that light finds a way through darkness, that what is lost can sometimes, against all odds, be found again. That's the end of the story. Sometimes the heroes who save us don't wear capes or badges, they wear collars and fur. Bailey's unwavering persistence reminds us that love leaves traces even time cannot erase. When the world stopped looking for Mia, he never stopped trying to tell us she was there. In our darkest moments, perhaps what we need most isn't someone who speaks our language, but someone who hears the truth when no one else is listening. What would you do if your pet started behaving strangely like Bailey? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. If you want more extraordinary stories just like this, subscribe to our channel and don't miss our next story.